Set to earn 215 times the average wage by 2020, and some really distressing details as well about what happened in that attack in Tenerife. You're going to just pick up on some of that, aren't you, Camilla? But we're going to start with the story we're talking to John Nichol about, and this is the military covenant. Coverage in the News of the World this morning.
Well, the military covenant, I think, is fantastic because it ensures that we're protecting our soldiers. But I can imagine now the police coming forward, because some officers also feel that in the line of duty they're experiencing an enormous amount of challenges, and there isn't enough support for them if they have injuries or post-traumatic stress disorders. So I think that is going to be a story that will develop. But it's brilliant that they've done it. It's really needed, especially on the mental health side, because provision was so patchy.
But it's also been questioned already, Camilla, as how it would work in practice. I mean,
well, that's the interesting thing.
There's a lot of plaudits for saying, yes, finally we will be the ones who will enshrine it in law. But how does it work in practice? What difference does it make to someone who's got a problem and is trying to fix it?
Well, at least now there is a possibility of taking the government to judicial reviews if soldiers' needs are not being met, whereas before one couldn't really do that because it wasn't law. So we'll have to see. Government will have to honour it, because creating headlines in papers are easy. Delivery is another question.
Are there parallels in your kind of work to things that have been made, laws that have been passed that have actually made a real difference?
Absolutely. It was one of Kids Company's cases that changed the law in relation to 16 to 18-year-olds being housed. Until we took that case to judicial reviews, local authorities were not housing 16 to 18-year-olds. And teenagers are so vulnerable.
So one thing can be reported in the paper is about to happen, a law can even change, but sometimes further action even then needs to be taken.
Absolutely. The question is, it will be tested through judicial reviews now. Yeah.
As I mentioned, this horrifying attack in Tenerife on Jennifer Mills-Weston, and obviously lots of stories about her in the papers today.
Well, I think understandably the public will be completely shocked. But I think also the public need to understand that the person who did this was very ill. And, clearly the warning signs were not picked up by the mental health services. And, what I also found very striking is that the conditions that he was living in, which were incredibly squalid, look exactly like the conditions we often find our children in when we do home visits. We're finding them in these kinds of environments. So I think a warning sign to society generally that if you don't step up in social care and mental health, there's always a price to pay.
Warning signs as well. The next story about mobile phones and Wi-Fi.
Oh, wow.
We talked a lot about this in connection with this sort of disruption in the classroom, but this is on the possible health risks.
This is a suggestion from the Council of Europe that actually mobile phones and Wi-Fi, because of the electrical magnetic field, might be interfering with brain development in children, but also potentially triggering some cancerous activity. And I think this is very serious, because as schools move much more towards computers and doing things through the net, they may have to radically rethink it. Because in another paper there's a story about Wellington, kind of going towards iPads on a daily basis. And I really think people have to pay attention to this, because the skulls of children are softer, and there's more possibility for waves to go through. There's some question about baby monitors here as well, which I think will make parents very anxious. But what's interesting about them is they're saying, the Council of Europe, let's not be slow. It's a public health issue, because with asbestos, they took a long time to get round to banning it. Yeah. So this time they're trying not to take that long.
It's one of those issues where people are very, as you say, people are very anxious about it, and then a report will come out saying, actually, we've looked into it, it's fine. and then you get, further down the line, somebody else saying, actually, we're still concerned about it, and it gets confusing about whether we've got the all clear or whether another report's being commissioned.
I know you want to pick up on the story from the Observer about parents and how to look after your kids, but
you don't have time. I'll come back with it.
Well, thank you. You said exactly what I was going to say. You're back in an hour's time.
I'll come back
Hold the
with this excitement. Yes.
Miller, thank you.
And Andrew Marr has joined us to tell us about the Andrew Marr programme. BBC One 9 o'clock. How are you?
I'm very well indeed, thank you. Well, the huge amount of security stories, of course, in the paper today ahead of the Queen's visit to Ireland. Reports of an Al-Qaeda cell in London, all sorts of stories. Got the Home Secretary Theresa May to talk about that and about her slugfest with the Liberal Democrat MP peers over police commissioners and police bosses. So there's a lot to talk about there. Also, the Irish Prime Minister, the Taoiseach, Enda Kenny, is going to be discussing that historic visit, the first time in 100 years that a member of the royal family has been down the south of Ireland. That plus the amazing pianist Lang Lang, who's played for the Queen, played for President Obama and many other people, and will be talking and playing for us after 9 o'clock.
Oh, that's a treat.
Very lovely.
Lovely. Thanks very much. Andrew Marr Show. It's not the Andy Marr Show.
It's not the Andy Marr Show.
No, sorry. Should treat it with the respect it deserves. BBC One 9 o'clock.
Let's see what's still to come on breakfast this morning.